Well, it's a major anniversary for both Vietnam and the United States. It's been 40 years since the fall of Saigon that marked the end of the Vietnam War. The last days of April 1975 brought a chaotic end to the fighting.
It closed a bitter chapter in both US and Vietnamese history. Millions of Vietnamese fled the fighting. Many rushed onto US helicopters as Saigon fell. Transported to refugee camps across the states, they began a new life. The devastating conflict left more than 3 million Vietnamese and nearly 60,000 American troops dead. But 40 years later, one-time refugees and American veterans have returned to Vietnam and been warmly received. My Trinh, together with her mother and brother, fled Vietnam on April 30, 1975, exactly 40 years ago to the day. She was 5 months old. Well, My Trinh joins me now from Washington, where she lives. My Trinh, welcome to the programme. This is really quite an anniversary for you, isn't it? You left as a baby. How do you feel about Vietnam today, a country that is your heritage but not your home?
Well, I have to say, as a wellness expert who's dealt with CEOs to working class people teetering on the poverty line, I can say that trauma stays with you psychologically, physically, and emotionally, and it is still devastating. When I went back in 2004 and was able to speak with people who, like my father, spent 14 years in a re-education camp in hard labor, they were still traumatized. So for those who are of the new generation and don't remember the war, I'm very, very hopeful, and definitely for the economic standpoint of Vietnam. But for those who suffered in a concentration camp and those whose family had to stay back, it was very hard for them to work because they didn't have ID and the government penalized them.
My Trinh, what does your family tell you about that time, about fleeing Vietnam with virtually nothing and starting a new life?
They said it was devastating because my family did very well. They were a prominent family in Vietnam. But when they came over to America, the Americans weren't taking their college degrees. So they literally had to start from being very prominent to working as waitresses and in the back offices of the shops. And that was very demoralizing, but it taught them humility and working hard and going for their goal.
I wonder to what extent, with the generation of your parents, that the wounds have now healed 40 years on.
As I said before, trauma really stays with you, and it stays within the family because so many of us suffered. My father, who spent 14 years in a re-education camp, he was the poster child for a post-traumatic stress disorder. So even though we've done well in America, the pain and suffering still remains. My family was torn apart on April 30th, 1975 when I fled. I wasn't able to be raised with my father or extended family.
At the same time, though, as I understand it, your uncle and also your stepfather have gone back to Vietnam to live and work. What does that say about the country today?
It says that the people who left Vietnam, came to America and wanted to rebuild the country. So my uncle went back to Dalat and started buying a lot of the land. And he has this vision that Vietnam will thrive despite the sadness from the war. So my brother also moved back to Vietnam, and he's a big part of trying to bring up economic stability and investments. So people in my generation who really have suffered growing up, they have high hopes to go back and invest in the country.
Which is a positive future. My Trinh, many thanks for sharing your story with us.